All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming out on such short notice. I think it was about a day or so, maybe less than 24 hours. So I'm Dan Magnuszewski. I'm the general manager or runner of Z80 Labs. And so welcome. Thanks for everyone for coming. And I just want to quickly introduce Kevin Purdy. He'll be the interviewer here today. He's was a former co-editor at Lifehacker, wrote the complete Android guide, writes for Fast Company, so on and so on. Co-founder of, or founder of, and runner of TEDx Buffalo, Co-work Buffalo as well, co-founder. Welcome Kevin Purdy up. Thanks. Yeah, have a seat. And now we want to thank Chris Sacca for taking time as he's visiting family here for coming out and talking with the community and taking time out. So I won't go into too much more detail, and I'll let Kevin and Chris take it away. So,
welcome to Z80 Labs.
Thanks.
Which is a thing here in Buffalo now.
It's definitely a thing.
Yeah. So you flew in from where today?
Like specifically?
Yeah, just what airport?
Reagan National.
Okay. And did you take Uber from the airport to Z80 Labs?
It's a secret Uber. We haven't really, no, we don't have Uber here yet.
You did have a secret Uber in Washington, D.C. for a little while.
Yeah, well, that's how Uber gets launched. So is that...
Uber, the black car service,
yeah.
That's having a few discussions with various cities about how they work.
Does everyone know who I am, by the way? We didn't really introduce
that.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
We talked about Uber, which I didn't start or anything. I just want to make sure.
Chris Sacca.
Yeah.
With 2 C's.
Yeah.
You are Sacca on Twitter, S-A-C-C-A.
That's me.
You are a investor of things.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Normally, when you say investor of things, it's money or time. So,
right.
And it goes into companies. And so
when you see your brother-in-law at a like family reunion, what do you tell him you do?
Well, actually, I don't explain this to my brother-in-law as much as I have a 9-year-old nephew named Drew, who also is an entrepreneur. He started a smoothie company recently,
nice.
Backed by us.
Is it organic?
It is. He actually, his first draw was for $35, which he used to perfect his recipe. And in fact, I taught him about NDAs, and he went back into school the next day and made his teacher sign an NDA before he would disclose any of his recipes for Ultimate Smoothie.
So you invest in companies and you're a smoothie consultant.
Yeah. So I've invested. I was one of the original investors in Twitter, Instagram, Uber, Twilio, Heroku, Lookout, companies like that. Before that, I was an executive at Google. Before that, I was a startup guy. And I was briefly a lawyer, but I don't tell many people that.
Yeah,
so let's just keep it between us.
I will. So you flew in from Reagan today?
Yeah.
And then you are from the Lockport area, or Lockport specifically?
Yeah, I grew up in Lockport my whole life. I was born and raised. My dad's from there, my grandfather's from there. And so this was a big trip for us to come down to downtown Buffalo. In fact, I was just trying to explain to my wife why I don't actually know my way around here, because this is like the big city.
And now the waterfront's all different too.
Yeah, that was disorienting. And if we did come down here, it was usually dark because we were coming down for Sabres games. So
your dad said this is one of the rare opportunities where you and your brother are both here?
My brother's not here yet. He'll be here shortly.
Why don't you visit more? Why don't you call?
Did my mom pay you to ask that?
So, what's it like coming back to Lockport, or Buffalo too? Does it look and feel different than when you were growing up?
I mean, it definitely looks and feels different. In fact, I was explaining this. Like, I feel like this area had its bottom a long time ago, and it's kind of been turning and going the other direction. Where I think most of America is still headed to the bottom. Like, this is an area where I think the painful shift out of the industrial era, hit in the 80s, and it hit all of us as kids and our parents friends, et cetera, were losing jobs and had to shift their whole career track. And it was a tough area to grow up in. But I think this area dealt with that, what I think a lot of America is dealing with right now. And so manufacturing jobs are moving overseas, and people are like, what do I do now? And most of America hasn't retooled yet, and I think Buffalo got a head start there.
Yeah.
So it's actually kind of nice to come to a community where people are looking up. They know how much worse it could be, and I was explaining how Chippewa used to be like a place you didn't want to drive down,
No.
and that there's actually like places in downtown Buffalo you'd want to hang out now. And to see kind of an area on the up and up is exciting because it's pretty unique in the country right now.
Gotcha. So you can look up your bio on your website for lowercase capital, see kind of your backstory and the companies you're invested in. But to your 9-year-old nephew or anyone else, like, what do you do with your day? Like, what is it you wake up in the morning and say, like, all right, I've got 52 companies, I'm gonna pick one of them.
Is that how many are on that list?
Roughly.
Okay. It's got to get updated.
So like your day is dictated or mandated by what exactly?
Well, I have this whole approach to life that I call staying on offense. And
Okay.
so, and I wasn't always like this, but I used to wake up, immediately go to my inbox, right? And you get that endorphin release when you get in your inbox, like there's all this stuff waiting for you, right? And I'm gonna move this way and look at everybody.
Thank you.
So you get in your inbox, and like research shows that you actually get a small endorphin release every time somebody sends you a new message or you respond to somebody else. So it's like winning a small little lottery over and over again.
Yeah.
But you could do that for like 3 hours, take a step back and realize you haven't accomplished anything. Like all you've done is what everybody else wanted you to do. And so it was my friend Jason Schellen who said, your inbox is like publicly posting your to-do list and allowing anybody else to add an action item for you. Right? It's a horrible way to live. And yet, your to-do list is the stuff that you want to actually get done, the stuff that makes sense to you, that matters to you, that moves the ball forward for your business, your personal life, health, exercise, whatever. And so I try as hard as I can to shift out of defense and into offense. Stay out of my inbox and on my to-do list.
But there's a lot of companies that probably want your mentorship, that want your or just your money, maybe. There's a lot of people vying for your attention from companies that you have a stake in too. So.
Yeah. So I used to actually take blind pitches. I had an email address up where I was like, send me your pitches. And after a few years, I realized I'd never done a deal off that list. And I had an intern go back and look at that list and see if we'd missed anything, and we hadn't missed anything awesome. And so I basically came to the conclusion that that list was kind of a waste of time.
Yeah.
And that instead, everything meaningful that I had done had come to me through friendships that I had with the entrepreneurs themselves, past working experience of those founders, or through a trusted network of other guys that I do business with, either other founders that I really like who referred somebody, or other investors that I really work well with. And so a couple years ago, I just cut off that alias and said, look, I'm not trying to play hard to get, but in my experience, my success as an investor has been predicated on a pre-existing nexus of some kind. And I don't just mean like a LinkedIn 6 degrees of bullshit. I mean like an actual relationship between two people that allows me to know that, none of these companies succeed on their own, and none of them succeed just with one backer or one investor. We usually bring a portfolio of strengths to them. And so it's actually a positive indicator. It kind of correlates with success. If somebody brings them to me who's good at one thing and I'm good at another thing, and we grab another guy and we kind of build out this array of talents that we can go move into to help a company.
So if someone in Buffalo has got a great idea and needs your attention, they have to get the attention of somebody else first, somebody in your orbit, in your your non-bullshit LinkedIn circle?
Well, one thing, I actually have a geography, and it was something I mentioned on my way in here, is that I used to invest everywhere because I deeply believe that no one geography has a monopoly on talent. In fact, I think a lot of the better deals are happening outside of Silicon Valley, where I think there's a real culture of entitlement right now. I think the prices are ridiculous. I think there's a bunch of kids running around who've been working on something for 12 weeks and think it's hot shit and want a $12 million pre. And so, I think there's a lot going on elsewhere where it's still about the talent, not about the ego and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I found when I invested elsewhere, like outside of my area, I had a company in Fargo, amazingly talented guys, and they're like, hey, we're trying to hire a new CTO. And I was like, who do I know in Fargo, or even within 6 states of Fargo?
Yeah.
Like, I was helpless. And if they needed new space, no idea. If they needed a recruiter, I got nothing. If they needed to get into a retail store, I can't help them.
Right.
And so what ends up happening is I realized like I can't be as effective as I want to be if I don't share some geography with these companies. And so I've been limiting my investing to San Francisco Bay Area, where I don't live anymore, but I still just have enough of a network there. LA, where I live half time, and in New York City, where I spend enough time that I have enough of a network there. And I've had a couple generations of companies there now where I can kind of rely upon other investors like Fred Wilson, who I know stopped by, to help me with stuff there. But I've had companies in London and France and Florida and Boulder, and like it's all very cool, and they're very talented, awesome people, but I just feel so helpless that I may as well be throwing darts at a board and trading public stocks.
Okay.
Like I like to play a rigged game, and I like to invest at really cheap prices, usually cheaper than what other people are willing to pay for the company already, so that I'm already up. And I like to invest in spaces where I think I know where they're going, and I can have outsized material impact on that company. So if I can invest in you and then tweet about it and actually build some traction, if I can invest in you and then get you on the radar of one of the potential acquirers, if I can put you together with a partner and get you on every store shelf in Best Buy or Bed Bath & Beyond or something like that, then I feel like I'm playing a game where the odds are in my favor, right?
Buffalo, though, and a lot of other smaller tech communities, they would often the business leaders and the local investors will pitch the idea that like it's cheaper to live here, like you were just saying. Nobody here wants $12 million for their app, and you can get a house for much less than you can get a house out there.
That is true. When we found that guy in Fargo, he made $45,000. That was legit.
Yeah, well, so I mean, I think that's a huge pitch for Buffalo. It's one you hear all the time coming out of the local business group. I mean, does that? I don't want to say it falls on deaf ears, but you got to find the right people who are willing to work in Buffalo. It sounds like you're saying.
Well, no, I think in meeting with a couple of people who are here already, I think you need to have a nexus, like a critical mass of people who've succeeded at being entrepreneurs before, who have capital available, and who are there to mentor you through all the aspects of the startup experience that go beyond just writing code. Yeah. It's helpful to have guys here who can teach you how to scale your startup, who can teach you how to transition from Rails when it gets too crazy over to Python, or how to make the most out of Amazon Web Services or something like that. That's all great to have that technical coaching, but it's also great to have somebody around who can talk about scaling the employee side of the company. What's it like when you go from everybody being able to sit around one table to multiple rooms, to not seeing everybody every day? How do you communicate? What's it like when you have to actually hire somebody and start delegating some responsibility to somebody else? It's scary as hell, right? And so, but it's nice to have people around who can help coach you through that stuff. It's nice to have people here who can maybe grease the wheels. You talked about how Uber's getting kicked in the shins by New York City right now. So
I hear.
Mayor Bloomberg got an email from me last night about that, and from about 3 dozen other fancy people who all pinged on him, and he's like, okay, we'll look into this, right? And so it'd be nice if you're doing something brick and mortar here to have those kind of political connections in this town and in this region, where you can say, hey, look, we're trying to build an automated parking meter system. Will somebody, even though we're a startup without a lot of financial backing, we're in this room with a bunch of other startups, will somebody just let us monkey around with a few of these parking meters? And it's nice to have that kind of community surrounding you. And so that's the kind of thing where, as an outside investor, it's really hard to kind of push and pull all those levers that would give you an unfair advantage as a company and me an unfair advantage as an investor. And so that's why I think these things happen organically and locally.
Gotcha.
It's also the same case that Skype is awesome, but it's not the same as being in the room together, right? There's a reason they don't play the World Championships of Poker the World Series of Poker over Skype, right? You want to be in the room, look the guy in the eyes despite his hood and his mirrored glasses and stuff like that, and read out the tells.
See his hands.
Yeah.
So you were grew up in Lockport. You started taking classes at UB in the 6th grade?
Yeah.
At UB, and taking kind of graduate level courses.
Was anybody else in the UB math program? So it's kind of unique. I've never heard of this going on anywhere else in the country, but I wasn't the only one. So they drafted kids from a few different schools in the area.
Yeah.
And we were inappropriately small for that campus, and carrying backpacks that were bigger than we were.
You had braces.
I didn't qualify for braces yet. It came much later. Yeah.
Okay. Need to update your
It was like prepubescent, really. I mean, that's...
So UB, up to a certain point, and then you went to Washington for college?
Yeah, I went to Georgetown, to the School of Foreign Service.
Okay. And
so
then,
I actually had a little bit of a math breakdown around junior year.
Of high school?
Yeah, around junior year of high school, I looked around, I was like, what the hell am I doing? I go to the University of Buffalo like 3 nights a week while all my buddies are in a cornfield somewhere drinking beers and playing cards. And so I just kind of flamed out on it. It was pretty intense. And so I ended up kind of quitting that program a little bit early, having a remaining half year as a normal student. And then when it came time to go to college, I found the one top-level school that didn't require any math or science. And so that was the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. So
Gotcha.
#1 rank for international relations, no math or science requirement.
And I think you said in a previous interview you wanted to be like a spy. Or some kind of diplomacy, like, haha, wink, wink, nod, nod,
Yeah, but
dinner party thing.
there are 2 reasons that didn't work out. 1, I'm very bad at keeping secrets, and 2 is spies don't make enough money to pay back their student loans.
Right.
And so I had to go find some way to sell out and make some money.
So right out of college, you were doing you took some of your graduate loans for graduate school, and you basically invested them.
Yeah, you put it euphemistically. So I basically went to I went to graduate from college, and I didn't have a job lined up. Mm-hmm. A lot of my classmates had these fancy consulting gigs and banking gigs lined up in New York, and I didn't have anything, and I was a little panicked. So I did what anybody did, and I applied to grad school just to defer that whole discussion. So I got into law school, and then I had an idea to start a company. So I took my law school loans. Anyone going to grad school, they're really happy to loan you all the money you want. The banks are really stingy with money for undergrad because you could still be very flaky, but now that you've nailed 4 years, they just throw money at you for grad school because they know you're mildly responsible and they'll get it back someday.
And they have all your numbers.
Yeah,
they know where you live.
So they threw these huge loans at me, and I took those checks and I told the school they never showed up. Mm-hmm. And I cashed the checks and I used them to start a company. But that went absolutely nowhere because sheer hubris, I couldn't admit I needed any help, even though I had no idea what I was trying to do. Or I knew what I was trying to do, I had no idea what I was doing.
Gotcha.
And so it went nowhere at all. And with the final few shreds of that money I had left, I still had been keeping the registrar at bay. I don't know, what the hell? And so
money's tricky.
I started day trading. And this is 1998.
But when you started day trading, you were 2, 3, 4 million in the hole?
No. When I was day trading, I still had about $10,000 of net worth.
Oh, good.
Well, I guess I still was negative net worth because I actually owed that student loan to somebody.
Right.
But I had $10,000 in the bank.
You don't count the government as debt.
Yeah.
It's just,
I had to pay it back to Sally Mae someday, but it was in the bank.
Whatever.
So I took that 10 grand and I started day trading. And this is before day trading was a thing.
Yeah.
It was 1998, DLJ Direct and E-Trade and Ameritrade had just all kind of happened. They were just all starting to come online.
They were still setting up their servers and you were on them already?
And it was very your delay to the market was 5 to 8 seconds, not 5 to 8 milliseconds. It was amazing. But there was a thing they hadn't built in, which is this reg called Reg T. So Reg T normally means that if you have $100 in your account, you can only buy $200 worth of stock on margin. So you always have to have 50% equity. And but they hadn't built that into the algorithm. So what you could do is with $10,000 in your account, you could buy $1 million worth of stock. And
from the right people who are willing to.
No. Just you just plug it in, but beep 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 beep, and computers made that kind of noise back then.
TI-83s.
Yeah, and so you'd put this order in, and the minute you bought this $1 million worth of stock, you'd get a phone call, and they'd be like, "Hey, we just looked at your balance, and there's only there's only $10,000 in there. I think you owe us $990,000." And you'd just be like, "Yeah, it's on its way." And then you own that stock for a week.
Yeah.
And if it went up, then you kept all the profits, and if it went down, you were effed. And so it's just so happened that it was 1998, and so whatever you threw darts at won. And
for a little while.
And if anyone wants to go research this, I happen to be invested in a stock called FirstCom. It was a Latin American telco that was ultimately bought by AT&T Latin America. It was one of the top 5 performing stocks in the NASDAQ in all of '99. And so when that happens to you, you're convinced because you're a genius, right? So, we all know, right? When things go well, it's because you're a genius. When things go poorly, it's because you're unlucky.
Well,
right?
when you lie to somebody to get something, and then
Yeah.
it goes well, you're like, yeah, I've got hustle.
It wasn't
When
as much of a
doesn't go
lie,
well-
yeah.
Well,
but no, I'm just
it was
kidding. It was a total bold-faced lie.
It was a shade.
But it was amazing because at the time I came back here and I spent a year here in Buffalo. I did my third year of law school in the JD MBA program here at Buffalo. Spent time with my family and stuff like that. And so I was day trading while I was here.
Mm-hmm.
And my roommates, like one guy worked at the Steer, one guy was a limo driver, and we all started trading this stock. And one guy bought a boat, and another guy had a fancy car, and I probably should have known that this was a symbol that there was a bubble happening.
You had a Buffalo bubble before there was even like a...
Well, when you walk into the Steer and they're playing CNBC instead of Girls Gone Wild, that's a sign that we're in a public market bubble. So
that is true.
So in spring of 2000, it all came crumbling down. The market imploded. In 72 hours, I went from $12 million to the good on paper to $4 million in the hole.
Yeah.
I owed it in my own name. I was totally screwed.
So do you think that risk-taking is kind of just built into your personality? And is it something you look for in other investors or other startups?
I mean,
that kind of risk-taking, you could look at it two ways. Either what is wrong with you? Or yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of an affliction, right? Mm-hmm. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a virtue. So a couple of things about that. One is, that's a really weird place to stop the story, just because we left it with me totally broken and impoverished.
I know, but it's like Act 2, so I want to have him go out and get concessions, come back, and then hear about...
these people are probably pretty sad right now.
Look at them, they're smiling.
But it is interesting. If you talk to... So Evan Williams, a good friend of mine, founder of Blogger, Twitter, now Obvious in the Medium product. I think of myself as an entrepreneur. I think of myself as a risk taker. But what that implies when I think about the risk is I'm weighing the likelihood that I will fail against the likelihood that I'll succeed. So I'm admitting the existence of the possibility of failure. Mm-hmm. When you talk to a guy like Evan Williams, or Jack Dorsey, or Mark Zuckerberg, or Larry and Sergey, all guys who I've had a chance to spend time with, the existence of failure, the existence of the possibility of that's just not a thing. It's not there. It doesn't enter into the calculus. So they're not weighing the oh boy, okay, it's a dice roll, I hope this works, right? Like the way normal human brains work. And so the most compelling entrepreneurs I know just know it's going to work out. And so you say, well, wait a minute, Ev started Odeo that didn't work out at all. That's what I'm talking. That's what's amazing. Odeo didn't work out, and yet when they went and started Twitter, he just knew it was going to work out again. I believe there's a different wiring in the brain in those cases. The more I spend time with these guys, I do think it's something chemical where it's not about gambling, it's not about risk, it's not about adrenaline. It's about just knowing that this thing is going to happen.
Gotcha.
And so I think some of us can pose as that, and we can get close to that edge a little bit and be okay, I'm risky and I'm daring and I'm willing to kind of push the limits and think about this in ways that others don't. But I think the deepest, most absolutely disruptive engineers and entrepreneurs and founders, they just don't, that doesn't enter into the calculus, the failure part.
Do you think that geography has anything to do with it? I feel like sometimes in a smaller town, or maybe with a less built up tech circle, or maybe just you don't feel like you know as many people in town, it seems like a little riskier to take that jump, because if things don't work out for you, there's not a big firm to hire you here, or you can't just kind of amble your way back up.
Oh, I don't know. Evan Williams is from who the hell knows Nebraska? Not even Omaha or Lincoln.
Yeah.
The middle of nowhere, Nebraska. And I think he lived in a van. I think he read about somebody in a magazine that he thought was smart and interesting, and he drove and lived in a van down in Florida outside that guy's door until he got a chance to meet him and stuff.
Gotcha.
A lot of people have crazy stories like that. I'll tell you, wait, should we go back to my story? Or
no, I want to hear this next story. I like hearing about rich people.
It's kind of related. That's why I was.
Okay.
Well, so All right. So as we were saying, no, I owed $4 million, man. I was like 25 years old. I owed $4 million effing dollars in my own name, right? That's more money than I ever thought I would make in a lifetime.
Not to Chris Sacca
right?
LLC, but
no,
Chris Sacca, dude.
I owed it.
Yeah.
I was just on the hook. And so I was able to negotiate it down a little bit because I was definitely a bankruptcy risk. I mean, look at me. Even now I look like a bankruptcy risk. But then I was even more disheveled. And so I hadn't done the unemployed rodeo clown thing yet, but so I was able to get it down to 2 1/8, and I had to just start working it off. And I couldn't even tell anybody how much money I owed. It was just like, it was such a crippling amount of debt that I couldn't even tell, like most of my friends, family, et cetera. I just had to start paying it off. And so I got a job in a law firm, which is about as low as anyone can stoop. And at night I was doing, I got to say this differently. I used to say I was doing anything I could for money, but it's not, it's misleading.
Anything that's not zoned against public
leads to a lot of, leaves too much open to the imagination. No, but like there's a site called Elance where you can, you might even find people that do like one-off freelance work for you for your startups and stuff. But I was the first lawyer on Elance, so I was writing contracts for people and God knows where. I was helping companies off of Craigslist like write their business plans and brand, and my brother and I voiced over a book once.
What book was it?
It was about an African American baseball player.
You had a lot of experience from
and it was his autobiography, and it was an audiobook, and so we had to make ourselves sound like African American baseball players. And
which you had encountered in Lockport.
Dude, we sent this guy the tapes, and he was like, "Right on, that's how. Yeah, that works." So that was off of Elance too, I think. Anyway, point was they were lean times, and so I was grinding it out. Got a job at one of my original clients called Spidera. When I started working with them as a lawyer, they were a 250-person company. When I joined, it was the day after the FBI had raided their offices. There were only 30 employees by then. Their competitor Akamai had sent the FBI in to shut the whole place down. They seized all the computers. Now, this is like a content delivery network, so you kind of need computers to deliver content. The FBI had seized them all and led the CTO out in handcuffs. And so that was my first day of work. Yeah.
It's like Arrested Development, but happening in real life.
I feel like post-traumatic stress actually even bringing that up. I mean, I finally got a job in like the worst recession in technology. Think about it.
To get there, I think you told a story once about networking in Silicon Valley. Is that when you got that? Is that how you got the job, or was it just straight from the law firm
when I lost my ass in 2000, I needed a real job, right? And so I took this job as a lawyer, was doing all this work at night, and then right as I was starting to get a little traction, I was laid off 4 days before September 11th. So for about 4 days there, I had job prospects, and then September 11th happened, and it was just like, it was the nail in the coffin of Silicon Valley. In fact, it got so bad, you couldn't get a U-Haul home because they had all gone one way out of town, and nobody was bringing them back to Silicon Valley. It was just dead. And so I decided I had to fight, and I had to hang in there and fight. I moved to a shithole apartment in a crappy part of town, and like I said, I was doing anything I could to kind of try and pay the bills and keep the debtors away. And one part of that was trying to stay in the game. I just had to network. I had to, I went to Georgetown, which is not really a feeder school to Silicon Valley. There isn't an alumni association out there, and I didn't have any connects or any hookups. So while I was applying for jobs, and I sent out 784 resumes and never heard back on any of them, I was also going to every networking meeting I could find in town. And I had a sport coat, and I had a business card at first that said Chris Sacca. And I'd hand it to people, and they'd be like, "Oh, you look like a good kid. Things will work out for you." And I'm like, "Fuck, I need something like now."
Yes.
By the way, that is an interesting perspective for anyone who has a job right now, and you have friends who don't have jobs. Like, it's really, when you have a job, it's really easy to think a month, 2 months, 3 months ahead. And yet you forget, like when you're unemployed, you're thinking literally day by day, week by week, maybe.
Right.
Like that money's running out. Maybe you're getting an unemployment check. Maybe you're still trying to find somebody to bum money off, or you're taking a really, like a fast food job or something. Like, it's really hard I'm sorry, it's really easy to forget that perspective, right? Like, I mean, friends of mine who are out of work right now, it's so easy for the rest of us to tell them, like, hey man, things will work out, you know, it'll come back. And you're like, no, like that's like the least comforting thing to tell somebody who's totally screwed right now.
If you lost your job, you'd still have 2 weeks out probably, or you know, a few months of unemployment even.
Yeah,
even
maybe.
With a real job,
but you know what I mean? Like, it's something. All of us who are employed, it's very, very easy to take that for granted, like particularly in an economy like this. Anyway,
so did you feel like sometimes you were just, you know, throwing pennies in a well with the networking events? Did you feel like you were, you know, wearing yourself out on appetizers and drinks?
To be clear, I never would have thrown pennies at that time. I was hoarding them. But, well, the appetizers and drinks, that was one of the ways I was getting fed. So I speak Spanish, and I would sneak into these events through the kitchen usually. And because I couldn't afford like the $20 entry fee to the Churchill Club or the World Internet Forum or the Chinese Software Professionals Association or the Indus Entrepreneurs. The Indus Entrepreneurs welcomed me as one of their own, by the way. They were hands down the most hospitable, the group from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, amazing people. But
they had a bigger presence than Georgetown.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. But it was fun. Like, I got into these things, and a friend of mine taught me that if someone makes eye contact with you, they want to talk. I don't know if that's true or not, but I believed it then. So like the minute somebody looked at me, I'd be like, hey, and I'd go in for it boldly. And I had a lot of great conversations, stacks of business cards, but like no traction because I was just Chris Sacca guy. And so I came up with the idea to build an entity and brand it. And so I went through a list of domain names to find something mnemonic that I could build. And I was taking all these authors' names, et cetera. And eventually I created the Salinger Group.
Not based on anything you knew or anyone you knew. It just sounded good.
I mean, I've heard of an author named Salinger, but yeah, no, it rolls off the tongue. The Salinger Group, you know, we sound. And at that time too, I needed to leave my career options open because I didn't know if I was ever going to get a job in tech again. So I needed to leave like the media world open, writing, film, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I was the Salinger Group, and my now wife, then close friend Crystal, helped me design a really kick-ass logo. And I found a guy in Elance to build an amazing site. You can actually, if you go to the our Internet Archive, you can find the Wayback Machine. You can still find my old website from the Salinger Group, and you'll notice it says a whole lot of nothing. It's like really brilliant. And it's all Flash, by the way, and it says a whole lot of nothing. But that was the idea. Was like I was trying to look bigger than I was because I was just this one person living in this really shitty apartment.
Probably good training for reading prospective websites, I assume.
Totally. So we had 3 divisions: venture, media, consulting. And I had this business card that Crystal designed for me that said Chris Sacca, principal, the Salinger Group. And no address, of course, because I didn't have a place.
Right. Or it's going to be different next week.
Yeah, but I would walk in, same handshake, hand him my card and just say we instead of I. And I shit you not, people would look me in the eye and be like, oh yeah, I've heard of you guys. You guys do good work. Yeah. So before you know it, I had a business, man. I had a thing. I was doing consulting and I was, advising guys on how to write business plans and I was getting stock and it was like a real thing. And ultimately I went on to, work at Spidera and the FBI raid and stuff like that. But all the while I kept the Salinger Group open to pay bills at night. And as an aside to that story, that was like the longest period of just malaise in the land of technology. Like so many of my friends didn't find work, moved back with their parents, et cetera. And when the market started to pick back up, people were looking to fill holes in their resumes. They'd been laid off in 01 or in 2000 and shit. And so all my friends would be like, hey dude, do you mind if I said I worked at the Salinger Group? I was like, of course not. Like, what did you do? Just tell me. And so I'd set them up with an email address. They'd list all their job responsibilities. And so check your own employee databases. You may find some of our alumni. But yeah, so ultimately, I worked at this company called Spidera. We were the ultimate turnaround. Just before I got there, they turned down a $950 million acquisition offer because the CEO was pissed it wasn't an even billion. Shucks. 6 months later, I raised money at a 40 million pre, and so fortune's turned. Like I said, we got our. Technically, I was a lawyer, right? And so suddenly, I found myself as general counsel of this company. I'd never so much as defended myself in a speeding ticket, but my dad's a lawyer, my grandfather's a lawyer, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this, and I suddenly find myself in court trying to help out my CTO who's facing some jail time for allegedly violating a hacking statute, Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and I was like, holy shit, I'm in over my head. But we won. We kicked Akamai's ass all over the place. They sued us at least 8 times on patent infringement. We sued them back, and ultimately they bought the company for what was $140 million at the time the deal was signed. When the lockup came off, it was over $300 million. So, but it was great. We were, our company was 1/3 the size of this room, but we basically, we took what was a venture-backed company, and we made it legitimately profitable and sold it, and it was a huge success story. And it was in the midst of that I actually, I was getting a little burned out. Like, lawsuits aren't fun. I'm a business guy.
They go for a while.
Yeah. And so I actually just went on my first vacation since I had been laid off. I was in Hawaii trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And like, the market still hadn't recovered. I didn't have a lot of options, but I was getting a little burned out. And a buddy sent me a job listing at Google that I was uniquely qualified for. Like, there were maybe 3 of us on the planet who could do what they were looking for. And it was so uniquely targeted for me that I wrote back like, F off, dude, that's not even funny. You're being an asshole. And it was
like, you thought he'd hacked up an HTML page just to mess with you?
He'd sent me the HTML instead of actually like linking it, right?
Oh, yeah.
So he's like, no, and he sent me the link, and I was like, oh my God. So I actually, I didn't know anyone at Google, but it turned out there's a woman from Buffalo named Liz Beyer. I don't know if she's ever come up on any of your radar, but Liz Beyer, no, she's out in Silicon Valley now,
okay.
But she hails from Buffalo, and she was a family friend of ours. She takes companies public. So she ran the Google IPO. She did not run the Facebook IPO, which is why it was such a disaster. But she is like the wolf when it comes to running an IPO. And so she got my resume on the desk over there, and a couple weeks later I was hired at Google, and like, things started turning around.
What was your title there? It was the...
I had a bunch of titles, because one of the things they did at Google was you got to print your own business cards.
Nice.
So you just typed in a title and sent it back, and then there were your business cards. My best known title was Head of Strategic Initiatives.
You worked on things like the wireless project for the Wi-Fi project for Mountain View. You worked on the Spectrum space, all things like that. And then, so how long did you work there for?
I was there 4 years and 2 weeks.
Okay.
Vesting. So
did you have stock options when you got in? Was it
yeah, everyone in Silicon Valley has stock options in every company out there, right?
Well, I mean, Google, how old was Google at this point? It was a little older?
Sorry, I got there in 2003, so pre-IPO.
Okay.
But lest you think I was a Google millionaire, they realized how valuable their options were going to be, and so they each gave us enough stock that ultimately, when I left Google, like, I had enough money to buy a house, which I have no complaints about. But people who got there 6 months earlier than I did made $50 million.
Do you think that working at, Spinera was a mid-sized business, and then Google's obviously probably became a bigger business while you were there. Do you value like the lessons you get from working at a big company? Do you think it's something that most people who are looking to start their own startup should do?
I talk most people out of working for a big company.
Well, what's big?
Google's 22,000 people now,
okay.
Right? And I'm a proud Google alum. Like, I loved working there. I'm very close to the company still. And I think a lot of the principles by which they organized that company were groundbreaking. But I think a lot of those principles are being emulated by startups now. And so I think Google innovated, and now that it's kind of proliferating as Google alumni and the story of Google kind of move out, I think people are copying the way that's done for the best. When I got there, I think I was like employee 700 maybe.
Okay.
And it was very startup-y still. So we all gathered in the cafeteria at night, for dinner, and I would see everyone, and I could learn about other aspects of the business. And even if I was working on this thing, I could ask you about that thing. And I felt like there was also room for a generalist. That's what I was. I mean, you listed, 1/10 of the things I did while I was there. Like, I co-founded the Google Talk, and I was on the M&A team and did a bunch of deals over there, and I opened offices, at home and abroad, and bought all the data centers, and just did a bunch of crazy shit. And there was room for me to kind of float and do that. One of the things that happens is, as companies get bigger, the generalists don't have a role anymore, because people stop defining their success by the company's success, and they start identifying by territory, right? So they do the ad insertion engine for this one particular product, for this one particular region, for this one particular currency. And you show up in their meeting, and they're like, what the hell are you doing here? You're the wireless YouTube data center guy, you know? And so that's harder and harder to kind of get those generalist lessons. And so right now, if you join at Google, you're probably going to work on one very specific thing.
Yes.
And when they acquire a company, you won't necessarily know the backstory. Why did they do that? And when there's something cool going on in ads, you might not actually get exposed to that, you know? And if you're watching them flail in social, you might not actually be close enough to get some of the lessons in what they're doing wrong in social. Do I seem biased right there? So I actually believe going to companies kind of like Twitter size and smaller. Well, I think there's two phases. So one is a company like Twitter that's got 700-800 people. It's actually closer to 900 now. Like, you can still get enough exposure to everybody else's job that you really get this holistic learning experience. And it's still not territorial enough that if you show up in the platform meeting, that anyone's like, hey, what the hell are you doing in the platform meeting? You know, like, you're not competing for somebody else's gig. As you move on down, I mean, what really makes me valuable to startups is Spidera, is where there were 30 of us there, and if we were running behind in the quarter on our sales, I was suddenly working sales that week. And if we were technically insolvent and we needed to juggle our payments to the bandwidth providers, like, suddenly I was the CFO. And if I happened to be sitting closest to the door, I was the receptionist. And like, you get exposed to these things. I mean, I learned how to move and configure a server just because, like, every now and then we needed to kind of decamp and deploy into a new data center. It was just like all hands on. And so, that kind of generalist experience made me a lethal advisor to startup companies. But no one here has ever heard of Spidera, and frankly, that name on my resume wouldn't wow you at all either. This is a funny little conundrum. At Google, we got to this phase where we were hiring people from Yahoo and Microsoft because those are familiar brands. They had job descriptions that looked like Google job descriptions, kind of.
Right.
And then after a couple years, our company started feeling like Microsoft, and we somehow were surprised, at that effect.
We're doing stack ranking.
We were doing book reports, literally, for the longest time, bosses at Google not only had 50 to 90 direct reports, but they also had their own job.
Yeah.
So they weren't just managing, they were actually doing their own stuff, writing their own code, building their own product, et cetera. And so their only job was to break up fights. Other than that, like, they were just to get out of your way, and the market for talent self-regulated a little bit. We entered this phase where suddenly we had managers whose only job it was to manage, and so they had to invent management.
Right.
And they had to be like...
had to create a whole new tier in the middle.
Yeah, make me a deck.
It sounds like you're an advocate for generalists. It sounds like when a startup has, here's the design guy, here's the back end guy, here's the front end guy. It sounds like you probably want them. You would at least advocate for generalists to be involved with the company.
No, like what?
Or at least move people around.
When is a design guy most effective? A design guy is most effective when they really understand not just the the initial human impression of a front page, but when they understand the shit out of the commerce funnel all the way through, when they understand conversion, when they understand the optimization of that page, when they understand how to build a page to optimize it for CDN load times, when they can do multivariate testing and grep on the logs to see like how that was actually impacting the flow through and making sure that you're not losing people out of that funnel. Like, that's your most effective designer, right?
Yeah.
Not just some kind of goofy kid who used to tag walls and went to art school and has funny tattoos. Like, it's somebody who has an integrated understanding of everything that's happening there, right? Same with, you can't just get the wonkiest computer scientist who comes out of school and think they're going to be amazing. Like, they have to understand how what they're building relates to all the way from the user, the advertiser, the publisher, the fulfillment partner. Like, they really have to have an understanding of how all that comes together, or they're going to build you shitty software. And so as a result, like, I don't think anyone has to go like study the generalist aspect of things, but if you want to be the most potent startup person you possibly can, like, I don't think that going to work at a Google or a Yahoo or a Microsoft right now is going to do that for you. I think you're going to end up doing one thing, and you'll have an opportunity to train really well in that one thing, and you'll eat really well, and you won't be all freaked out at night because you know your paycheck's coming tomorrow, and like, they will do some education and stuff like that. There'll be some formalized education and training that you don't get in a startup, but you won't get exposed to this panoply of skills that you get exposed to when you're working in a startup. And so I actually think like the best training for a startup is a startup.
Gotcha. So in a place like Buffalo where there's fewer startups to work at, or what would you tell somebody if they're like, how do I do this here? I got family here, I got kids here, I can't go to Silicon Valley. I can't go to New York.
Yeah.
How do you chicken and egg that problem?
What's happening here, right? I mean, it would be different if all you guys were gathering for the very first time and you're like, holy shit, there are exactly 0 startups in this region. What should we do, right? By the way, I've been to those meetings before.
In what cities? Name them. So we can make fun of them later.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's a good question. I think I did one of those in Atlanta once. I think I did one in Kissimmee, Florida, which is like Orlando, basically.
Yes. There's vacations down there.
I think I'm trying to think, maybe Minnesota?
So they actually have, so the mayor or the business team in town?
Yeah, it's usually the development office. Oregon. I did one in southwestern Oregon. The development office, we're like, what can we do? How can we create, like something valley?
We need more mixers.
Like you got to stamp something valley. It's always, yeah.
So what do they suggest doing, and what do you suggest doing? What's the usual approach? And
I don't think you can fake it. I don't think you can force it. Like I said, I think you need just some smart people, right? Mm-hmm. Like who have a modicum of technical skill. I think you need physical space is one of the things I always actually encourage. Like you need a place for people to know that they can go there and there will be other like-minded people, right? It's like the YMCA, except for startups. That's
a good logo, actually.
Do you remember that old song? Like there's a place you can go?
Yeah. It had a lot of vague allusions to things.
Yeah, I mean, it was a place you could go for that. But you need like a physical place, right?
Okay.
You need, like I said, a critical mass of mentors who've done this before, mm-hmm. like who have built things, even if there weren't like apps in the App Store, who have just taken a chance, funded something, built something, scaled something, sold something, who just understand that funnel, right? I mean, when
it doesn't have to be on a server, it can be something else.
Yeah, it's kind of like sharp people who've built stuff are usually very able to transition that thinking over to digital. I think there's a lot of hubris in the digital world that like old guys wouldn't understand what we do for a living. It's really not that much different in the end. Like you still have to convince somebody to buy your shit or spend enough time on it that they get exposed to somebody else selling them some shit, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of comes down to those two functions. And so it turns out there have been generations of people with a lot of success doing that, and a lot of them are in this town. And so having a critical mass of folks who are around who are willing to support that is important. And then I think so you're asking the question, like a person who's here, they have a family, et cetera. I think step number one is just being exposed to this environment. So going to these coffees, going to these get-togethers, going to speaker series, like going to hack days and just being there. I mean, I get asked all the time by about to graduate from college kids or people in business school, like how do I crack into startups? And I was just like, you're just present.
Especially maybe if you're not an engineer. It feels like if you're a Python wizard, pretty easy sometimes, easier, but maybe if you don't have very specific skills that you think they're looking for. So
I have an intern named Adam Bezvinik. He's in his second year at Harvard Business School. I've been in the same room with Adam once. But he's worked for me for over a year now. When it came time to hire somebody, I didn't actually post a rec because this guy had been replying to my tweets for 3 years. Like he had been sending me articles that I had missed. He had been pointing out hot companies. He had been adding value to my Twitter stream forever. And if you watch, he does it for a lot of people actually. Like he's become kind of Twitter friends with a lot of other influencers. People he's never even met, really, but he's just a straight hustler doing this, and he's not technical. He went to Duke, and he was a tennis player. I think he was actually ranked in the world at some point, but he's just a sharp guy who reads well and shares that information well, and like hangs around the startup culture. I have another intern who's an undergrad at Harvard named Peter Boyce. Peter Boyce, his handle on Twitter is Bad Boy Boyce because his last internship was for Diddy, and which Peter is doing is studying technical stuff at Starboard, but he also started the list is this long of like the entrepreneurial coffee groups and pitch contests and stuff that he started in Shepherds, et cetera, and he's like I don't even think he can drink legally yet, and he's like a player in the startup world,
The Bills are playing the Jets this weekend.
Yeah, are you going to ask me or Gary Vee?
I would like your thoughts on that. That's how I wrote it down.
Well, I mean, it's a good team this year, right? I'll tell you what I'm struggling with, though. I'm struggling with the brain injury stuff, man.
Yeah.
Like,
You feel like a kind of guilt about liking football?
Yeah, I do. Like, would you let your kid play football right now?
I think most people would say no, but it's kind of hard to like feel like, oh look, I'm enjoying this so much and it's killing people.
I mean, I grew up a Bills fan. In fact, my mom we went to my parents' house today and she dug out like my old crusty bib from when I was a baby. It's like a Charlie Brown in a Bills outfit and stuff like that. Like, I grew up with that as my religion, but I really worry about this head stuff. It's real. And I don't think we can pretend it isn't. And I don't know if there's a way to mitigate it. I mean, I really like, I'm a super fan of hockey, and I really like the steps the league is taking to mitigate head injuries in hockey, and hopefully like we can prevent some of these same problems. But
if either team was in the playoffs, would you be in Buffalo more often?
I've definitely flown back here just for playoff games. There's no doubt about it.
Gotcha.
What did we figure out? 2007, Game 5, Drury with like 4 seconds left, and then Finnegan off to win it. I was there.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's no doubt about it. That's a draw for me.
Gotcha. And with a really smooth transition then, maybe we should ask the audience if they have any questions.
Yeah, hi, my name is Michael, and I'm super excited that you're here. Thank you. But the question I have for you is, I want to know your thoughts on today's startup world, you know? So I was in the Valley this summer, and I've been to a couple of pitches and all this other stuff. And all of a sudden I noticed that everyone has this idea. They claim it to be an idea, and they feel it's going to be the next big startup, and they come do these pitches. So I'm curious as to what you think about these so-called ideas. You know, it's just some random thing which is like similar to which is already all out there, you know? Just some minor modification twist, and they come up with a new name, and boom, it's there. But as an investor, you know, what are your thoughts? Like, is this kind of like the new bubble, or is it like, it's like, you know, people are investing into these kind of startups, and I don't know how it happens.
Yeah.
After that, but
well, we're definitely in a bubble. There's no doubt about that. You said a few things. First of all, thanks for the kind words. You know, it's ideas are like. Ideas aren't even worth talking about with an investor. Like, ideas are so cheap right now, you know? So, I mean, hoverboards. Wouldn't hoverboards be fucking amazing? Like, I've got this idea for this hoverboard. Like, fund me. But, so, I mean, I think you know by now, like, all the art is in the execution. All the art is in getting a couple of other people together with complementary skills and motivating, like, actually putting some code together. I won't even invest in business plans. Like, I only invest in things that are live, that I can touch. And I've missed cool deals because I'm like, look, that sounds like a great idea, but I want to interact with it. Like, your mock-up looks cool, but at least give me some live code on the server. And I do think that separates the wheat from the chaff a little bit. I do think that separates the talkers from the doers. And that, as an investing strategy, has worked out for me. That said, something that's evolved a little bit for me since then is I used to say, like, just send me a URL and I'll invest in the URL. But I've since found that I've got a lot of really cool hackers who put together a URL, and there's something live there and it's got some users and I can kind of wrap my head around it. But then when we sit down to talk, it's clear I've done more thinking about the future of that thing than they have. And that's backwards, right? Like, when I sit down with an entrepreneur, they should be teaching me their space. Like, they should have sector expertise, even if they haven't been working on it, you know, prior to this company. They should have just stayed up so late and read so many Wikipedia articles and interviewed so many people and cold called so many other guys in the industry that they just know the whole thing. And they should be teaching me about it in the pitch. But I found that I'm seeing these things that are hacked together, cool, designy, you know, snappy, et cetera, but there isn't the longer term thought behind it. So it used to be like business plan, no URL. And then, you know, that was before I was an investor. I was always like, send me the URL. Don't worry about the deck. But now I'm like, send me the URL. If I kind of get it, now let's dive into the deck. And it's funny, I've just found most entrepreneurs don't have a deck right now. And that's bananas. Bryce Roberts wrote recently about how this is like the nadir of pitches. Like, pitches have never been worse than they are right now.
That's saying something.
It is. But, well, there's been a transition, right? The Valley 1.0 was run by MBAs. I mean, the way you built a company was you came up with an idea, you wrote a 60-page business plan, you schmoozed until you got somebody to write a big check, and the CEOs of the companies were all MBAs who were talking to former investment bankers as VCs whose job it was to shine the bankers who were still bankers and take it out to the public market, right? And that's how all that money flowed. And ultimately, you're like, quick, sell this to the public before they realize it's a huge heaping pile of turds and take your money. Like that's how that worked.
And now you're Mark Cuban.
And so yeah, he was smart enough to hedge. Can't begrudge Mark. What happened was we had this full, when the Valley fell apart, all those guys went to go, all those MBAs like decamped and went to sell subprime loans. And all the engineers stayed, and we're like, well, I guess
sounds like
we'll
the
build
Lord of
a
the
thing.
Rings, really.
Yeah, kind of is. And so they stayed and they started building stuff. And they were empowered, like the actual builders were empowered by guys like Paul Graham, who said, look, you don't actually need an MBA there. I can teach you some of these things. They're not as complicated as you might think. And so I can teach you the basic financing documents, and I can teach you how to think about hiring and how to post job recs, and I can connect you to designers who can make your site pretty and that kind of stuff. So before you know it, we had this ascendance of the technical founder. And that was a big, big thing. And one of the byproducts of that, though, is less polish. Like, just you've got people who are, they're not hand-wavy bullshit artists. Like, they let the code speak for itself, but you'll find sometimes the sites are less polished and the stories are way less polished. And oftentimes they're not presenting that historical context of this is what it was, this is what it could be, and that kind of stuff. And so I actually think it's a lot easier to fix that than to fix like kind of the emperor no clothes, like MBA driven world. I'm glad that a lot of the business guys have been chased out of the Valley.
Okay.
But I absolutely think we're in a bubble. And I think that there's a couple things driving that. One is that it's very cool to be an investor right now. Like, it's very hip. Somebody said, I've never checked this data point, but somebody said that there are over 3,000 bios on Twitter that say angel investor. And so that's pretty amazing, right? Like, and when you go to, Y Combinator's demo day now has over 450 investors, like 2 or 3 times. That room fills up, and it's not just the super angels that you know of. It's like anybody who used to be a product manager at Microsoft or eBay or VMware, or was a dentist or a lawyer, or somebody who's got 25 grand. Like, they write those checks. And so one of the things that's happened is with the empowerment of the technical founder, have rounds being done without any actual lead investor, the leaderless round. So it used to be like somebody steps up and be like, I like it, I'll invest, and let me pull together a syndicate, and then you would tell me who you also want to be involved, and then I would bring a package to you with a valuation on it. Like, I had a company called Zencoder that raised $2 million with no lead and all like $50,000 to $100,000 at a time. In fact, we sold them to Bright Cove recently, and I asked for the cap table, and I looked, and I was the biggest investor on the cap table as an angel. And I was like, wait, I always thought maybe you had a VC there, keeping an eye on things. I wasn't. I thought you were just going, holy shit. They did really, really well.
Yeah.
John Dahl's amazing, but I couldn't believe I owned more of the company than any other outsider as just an angel investor. And so I think the leaderless round has led to these prices just inflating because there's no one there to kind of keep it in check, et cetera. And for a lot of people, they've lost touch. Something that's 12 weeks old with very little traction, with a team that hasn't proven yet that they can work well together at a 14 pre or something, makes no sense at all. But for a lot of people, it's like their calling card now. Like, hey, I'm an angel investor. Hey, I'm in that hot shit right now. And so I think that's created one half of the bubble. The other half of the bubble is money has been made long enough now in Silicon Valley that it attracts the posers. And so there is a full-on entitlement bubble. Something that started happening, I guess, with people who are now about 29 years old, maybe, 28, 29 years old, is that when I went to school, computer science programs were not fashionable yet. And so if you went to a computer science program, you still had to get a summer job, like an actual job. Like, you had to pay bills, and you weren't, you didn't go to computer camp all summer and TA classes. And
there's no Google
go to school
projects.
And you weren't going to school on full scholarship. They just, it wasn't sexy. What happened was, after I graduated and kind of a few years later, people realized, holy shit, these computer science majors are the ones who are not only doing the most amazing stuff and bringing great energy to campus, but they're also the ones who are endowing the school later when they sell these companies. So let's plow money into these scholarships. Let's make sure that they get the easiest work-study jobs, or they get to TA their classes. And so I realized when I was still at Google, we had a generation of kids who'd never actually had a job. And
Like they'd never waited tables, they'd never...
not even remotely. In fact, this manifested itself because we had 600 full-time chefs at Google when I left in 2007. And
So plenty of opportunities to bust tables.
plenty of opportunities, but like the chefs there are like real chefs making real food, and they were from some of the best restaurants in the area and who'd chosen to work there, and they're full employees. A lot of them are just brilliant people. Like the woman who ran the vegan station was Mirit Cohen, was she had a PhD in economics actually from Stanford, and she just preferred vegan food. We started to notice some of the young engineers like yelling at our chefs. So, people, pardon my language, but what the fuck? What do you mean, no fucking quail? And you're just like, wait, oh my God, really? Did you just say that?
Is that the title of your book about the bubble?
Yeah, no, just
fucking
like,
quail?
yeah, like you ran, like, dude, you're complaining because they ran out of quail? Like, we get free quail at work. Like, it's organic and locally sourced, and it's free for your friends and your family and anyone you bring to campus, and these people sweat over it, like, and you're, holy shit. And I would just ask, I'm like, have you ever had a job? And one guy who went on to actually found something, and then he got kicked out of that company too. But he said, he was just being a complete dick, and I was like, have you ever had a job? He's like, yeah, my parents made me work at Subway once for 2 weeks, but I got sick of it, so I threw a sandwich in a customer's face and told him to fuck off and got out of there. And I was like, explains everything I need to know, right? And so it's pervasive, man. I mean, just as I was leaving Google, we started to have like the parents who would call up because their kid got a bad employee review, I mean, like, true.
You now become a soccer team.
Yeah, it's just bad. And so I feel like that generation is in the world of startups. They're there. Like, I don't think it's reflective of everybody in startups at all. I think there are some brilliant, conscientious, hard grinding founders, but kind of speckled within them are just these incredible, entitled pains in the ass who, I've made it my business not to deal with them at any cost.
It's a lot of bad currents coming around at once to form this bubble.
I think what happened was what used to be an optimization exercise turned into a maximization exercise. So instead of, let me hire the right guys and raise the right amount of money to build the right company and raise it from the guys who can be most helpful to like, I'm going to auction off shares in my stock to the highest bidders. I don't give a fuck who you are. Stay out of my business. I don't even want to talk to you. Like, my shit is hot right now. So, And before you know it, you've got companies looking around being like, hey, wait, who's here to help me? Who's here? I need some advice. I need some guidance. And so I think we're coming back around. And Paul Graham is a really good bellwether of this. I mean, in the beginning, he's recently kind of said, hey, look, I think it's going to get a little slower, and I think we got to start being choosier about who invests and who we take money from. But it's not incredible. It's not as fungible. It shouldn't be as fungible as people have been treating it right now.
It's like pitches at a wedding.
Was that like a 17-minute answer to your question?
So you mentioned the technical co-founder, and it seems to be like the paradigm right now, where you got these guys going out and they've got great ideas, or they already might have a product built, and they're approaching the VC or the angel investing community. The community feedback that I see in the beginning is that you don't have somebody in the head seat, like that CEO seat, somebody who can actually take the company, run with it, take it through an exit, or understand exactly how to grow through it. So it becomes like the chicken and egg problem between the investor or having the right team in place. How do you break through some of those barriers?
The CEO doesn't matter in the beginning at all. In fact, I had a company that it's called FanBridge, and it's absolutely just crushing. These guys, this is actually like one of the happiest stories in tech ever. I was working really late on a Friday night. A bunch of my friends were tweeting about being out partying, and I was just grinding, trying to get my fund off the ground. And I sent out a tweet, said, I'm busting my ass late on a Friday night. Like, who else is out there? Tell me somebody's out there working late on a bootstrap profitable startup. And these guys from New York City, so they were already 3 hours even later, were like, we are. I was like, no shit. And Alexis Ohanian from Reddit helped connect me to these guys too. He knew them and vouched for them. And it was called FanBridge. And there were these two guys, Noah and Spencer, who had day jobs. One worked at a record label, one was a consultant. And at night and on weekends, they built this thing called FanBridge that at the time was managing over 100 million fan relationships on Twitter, Facebook, by email. And so I flew out to New York to meet these guys. I was like, which one of you guys codes? And they're like, oh, neither of us do. I was like, well, how the hell have you built this massively scalable email engine? And they're like, oh, we got a guy in Argentina who does that for us. And I started asking questions about the guy in Argentina. They're like, oh, we've never met him, actually. we met him over the internet, but he's awesome. And we've Skyped with him, and he's been making this thing happen. And so here I was talking to these two guys who have like changed the face of fan management. And they now manage over 200 million fans. It's amazing. But they did it without any schooling in this, like no technical training, et cetera. They did it as partners. There was no CEO there. In fact, Laura Seidel from NPR, this is a couple years ago, and tech was still getting beat up a little bit. She's like, hey, look, I need to go on the radio with like a positive tech story. Do you have anything happy in the world of tech? And I'm like, I happen to have these guys. So I told them, I'm like, look, I'm coming to New York. We're all going to go into the studio and tape Morning Edition with NPR. And they're like, no, we can't. I was like, why not, man? This is amazing. They're like, well, because we've never told our bosses that this is what we're doing. I was like, all right, well, I mean, we got to make a decision. Are we going to jump and do this thing or what? And so I think that day they lied and told their boss they had like dentist appointments or something. And then we went to the studio and taped national radio. But soon thereafter, they quit their jobs. They went for it. They eventually flew to Argentina and finally met their third co-founder. But it was like 2.5 or 3 years into that company that we eventually were like, look, we got to just pick one of you guys to be CEO just for the sake of like the company looking to one person, probably signing some documents, like just like putting someone forward on this thing. Like it was functioning perfectly fine, like with these two guys, and they have very complementary strengths. And Spencer ended up being the CEO. Noah could have just as easily been the CEO. The guys are just killer. And so I don't think you need to tier out or label the management in the beginning. Like I think having a strong team is important. So having people who have vision and it's aligned and who have the capability of actually pushing out some code and who have the willingness to grind it out. And I mean, sometimes, like with the launch of Uber, the guy who really got Uber going, so Garrett Camp, founder StumbleUpon, came up with the idea for Uber. He bounced it off Travis Kalanick, who at the time was founder of Red Swoosh. He may have just sold Red Swoosh. Bounced it off him. They really liked the idea. Garrett hired a coder named Oscar Salazar to write up the first version of code for Uber. And then Garrett actually just rented a couple of cars himself, put them out there on this app, and then told his friends about it, right? When it came time to actually launch it as a company, they found this guy named Ryan Graves. The way they found him was that Travis just said, hey, who's the hardest hustling guy out there following me right now? And Ryan Graves said, I am. And Travis said, prove it. And Ryan proved it two ways. One is he showed up in San Francisco immediately from Chicago. And two is he told us about a story we later verified that he had gone out around Chicago and signed up like 20 or 25 different places on Foursquare mayor deals. Like he'd gone to a place and be like, hey, what kind of treat are you going to give the mayor? But without any permission from Foursquare whatsoever. And then he flew out to Foursquare and was like, hey, can I meet with Dennis? And they're like, dude, sorry, Dennis is busy. And they're like, no, seriously, I just want to show him. I got all these mayor deals. And they're like, who the hell are, oh my God. So just like sheer hustle. So we knew with Uber, like a guy like that would be willing to walk into any shady limo company on the planet and knock on the door and strike up a rapport with the Armenian dude who's running it and figure out how to get something going where we can work together, get those cars going, et cetera. And like, I mean, it was just sheer hustle and initiative and follow through. And like along the way, he's learned a shitload of Excel and yield optimization and management and R squared and like cohort analysis and stuff like that. But like that's that drive that makes these businesses work. I mean, Melody McCloskey, who runs Style Seat for us, like Melody was a product manager at Current, the TV station. So not necessarily the most amazing, name that jumps off the page for you, Current, and yet, again, she had one of these jobs in a small enough place that she got to watch the other functions and stuff. But she's come out and she's dominating the booking and calendaring space for beauticians and nails and massage stuff, just dominating it, like absolutely blowing the doors off this space. And it's because she goes to every conference where there's no other startups. Like there are these beautician conferences that happen that you and I wouldn't even know are taking place. They're in Kissimmee, Florida, I bet. But she's just absolutely crushing this space, right? She didn't really know how to code. She found a great co-founder in Dan Levine, who's just an amazing amazing coder, and they've been crushing it. But like, there's no specific formula for these things. And like, Melody on paper would have never been picked as a CEO, right?
She wouldn't have
She's
had
like,
that on-paper CEO.
She's under 30, UC Davis graduate, so not like a top school. You know, she was a woman, so she has that presumption going against her, the way this fucked up business works. Like, so there were all these hurdles, and yet like she just went out and without anyone's permission just won the space. And so I think anyone who's trying to force a paradigm of like, hey, build a hierarchical org chart before we'll fund you is so full of shit that they've never built anything. Like, I think anyone in this room who's ever built and launched anything realizes like in the beginning it's just like, dudes, let's get some shit up. You're gonna handle that, you're gonna handle that, I'm gonna handle this. Like, let's reconvene in a little bit. You're in charge of the Red Bulls. Like, you know, let's do this. Like, you know, and they've lost track whether it's Tuesday or Saturday. They have no idea, and like just shit is shipping, and users are jamming on it, and eventually like your next 2 hires, they don't even know who the CEO is, et cetera. Like, you've just kind of pulled in some guys that you know from the community that could hammer something out for you, and eventually you're going to raise your second round of financing, or you know, or maybe before then you go in and you talk to Best Buy about why they should stock your stuff, and somebody's got to put on a suit and pretend they're the CEO. But for the most part, like that, the titles are just superfluous, man. Like, totally superfluous. And so I just think build a really effective team, and I wouldn't take money from anybody who told me that I had to pick one guy as the CEO that early in a company. Like, that is a red flag to me. I would not take their money.
So Peter Thiel has said that, you know, he believes there's a lack of real true innovation in the Valley. That it's almost like the Valley solving like the Valley's own problems. Do you think there's enough people solving like problems like healthcare and education? Do you think you know, they're focusing on the wrong ideas or wrong problems?
Well, Peter Thiel is also building an autonomous state out of like an oil platform off the coast of the Peter Thiel is an incredibly smart, weird dude. So like, I actually think college is important. Like, I don't think it's the only way to become successful in life. Like, Evan Williams, Biz Stone didn't go to college. Like, but I think like, as I look around, like college cranks out interesting people. Like, and I don't just mean like jamming your life full of pre-professional courses in college, like accounting 1, accounting 2, accounting, holy shit. Instead it's like liberal arts with a capital L. It's like your last chance to learn with a capital L, and like actually learn how to interact with people and have some fun and play some sports and read real books about like just fascinating things and study abroad. I mean, one of the things that's really messed up about computer science programs now is they're so programmatically tracked that kids don't get to study abroad anymore.
You went from the UB, still in high school, math and science program to Georgetown Law. Do you feel like you missed some of that chance?
No. I went to this Georgetown School of Foreign Service, where I lived in Ecuador, Ireland, Spain. Upon graduation, I went to El Salvador.
So you value it then, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this didn't come up in this interview, but yeah, I have 4 principles for hiring. One is you must have had a crappy job at some point in your life, like a job, like a shitty tipping, dig ditches kind of job. Like, as I look back, and I've put numbers to this, as I look back at everyone I've worked with that I've ever gotten along with and sorted them into like, I like building stuff with these people, I don't like building stuff with these people. I've made a lot of money building stuff with these people, I haven't made a lot of money. It's like, it correlates, I mean, it's like an R squared of 1 that they have had a real job at some point. Like, just because in your shittiest day at a startup, in your worst day, it doesn't compare to somebody's shitty day working in a kitchen in this town. It doesn't compare to somebody's shitty day working in a factory. It doesn't compare to somebody's shitty day working on the roadside, manning that you know, put the brakes on, there's workers here, you know, as like every truck blazes by and just sprays them with the bullshit from the road, right? Like, that's a horrible job, right?
That's a bad day to build a job.
We have these days like, oh, fucking Microsoft launched 8 and they stepped on our thing, or the App Store, oh man, our shit got rejected, right? Yeah. It's like a horrible day, and yet you don't go home with any actual burns on your body or anything, and so... And so I will only hire people who've had like a real job and who can appreciate that our worst days are still a gift. Number 2, I like to hire people for whom physical activity is still part of their life. So I like people who play team sports. I've actually found that people who really excel at individual sports are pretty cool too, actually. But like, it's just, we can't have these kind of, these kind of homogeneously like intellectual pursuits anymore without taking care of our bodies. So like, I just think like, the research is clear, like healthy, endorphin-fueled people are more creative, more productive, and better to be around. And so I try and deal with people with whom athletics plays some role in their life still. Number 3 is, as I mentioned, like I only hire people who have studied, lived, worked, or traveled extensively abroad. And there's a reason for that. I think like not only does it teach you, perspectives, and it allows you to kind of step out of your own skin and see how other people live, which I think is really important when you're building product. You're like, otherwise we would just all build the product that we want specifically for ourselves and not solve the problems of the rest of the world and not think about how other people use our stuff.
Finding organic coffee bars in San Francisco.
There's a lot of those.
Yeah. But you need an app though to find them.
Yeah. But I also think there's something about going to a country when you don't speak the language and you have to walk up and ask somebody else for directions or for help. There's just something about that moment, about like the moment of sheer humility where you have to count on the inherent kindness of another individual or you're totally screwed, right? Like you could get through your whole life in this country and never have to do that, right? Like you really could. We can always be in our comfort zone here. But as soon as you step off a train or a plane in another country and you're like, go to Asia and you're like, I can't even make out the street sign because it is in such Japanese that I have no idea what that thing says. And you're trying to match character for character with the book. And you're like, wait, that squiggle goes left. Oh my God. And so you're just walking up to people and you're like, please tell me you speak some bit of English. I am so lost in your country. I really need your help. Like, there's just something about that. So that global, worldly, humble perspective, I think, leads to better people to work with. And then the 4th is just no douchebags. So, like, it's more quantifiable than you think. Yeah.
There's a chart somewhere?
Yeah. But no, like, reference the hell out of anybody that you hire or work with, right? I mean, the hell out of them. Like, I will call somebody's current employer, that's fine. I'll let them know, but I'm just gonna be like, I know you probably don't want your employer to know you're looking for a job, but I have to call people there. And hopefully they respect you enough that they'll keep your intentions quiet, but reference the hell out of people that you wanna work with. And so those are my principles of hiring.
So to the question then of like, I'm sorry, the question again.
Do you think that there's real problems being solved?
Oh.
So
yeah, getting new and different.
Peter Thiel's quote on that is, we used to dream of we wanted flying cars and we got 140 characters, right? Which is cool because it fits in a tweet. And so it's kind of funny we're all talking about it because it proliferated by Twitter. But I think that's incredibly nearsighted, and it goes to so I used to work for Eric Schmidt at Google, a guy who I admire a lot and consider a mentor. And after I left Google, Eric was on stage a couple years later and he was asked about Twitter. And he said, Twitter, that's the poor man's email. And it was funny because like a lot of people were outraged by that. And for me, actually, a light bulb went off. And I called up Ev, and he was my neighbor at the time, and I went over and I grabbed a glass of wine. I was like, I got it. I finally understand it. Because when we were at Google, Blogger wasn't a well-understood product. At Google, Blogger was never funded well. They never gave it a lot of employee or engineering resources. It was neglected. And you're like, it's the 9th largest site in the world, independent of Google. And like they couldn't get engineers or product managers assigned to it. And we could never figure out why. We're like, is it because Ev and Biz didn't go to college? Is it because they dress like hipsters and live in San Francisco rather than like suburbanites in Palo Alto or Mountain View? Like, we could never quite figure it out. And when Eric Schmidt said poor man's email, I got it. Like, I realized Blogger and Twitter are not hard science problems, right? So Google solves really hard science problems. Like they hire the smartest possible people on the planet to solve equations they're iterative equations with 500 billion variables, like not a made up number. Like that's how big that equation really is. And so the genius to Blogger and Twitter was in everything that isn't there. It's everything that's been stripped away to leave that blank canvas that enables anyone in this room to be a publisher, right? And so a computer scientist looks at Blogger and they're like, oh, that's just a front end on FTP, right? And yet, to this day, there are still people among us and in communities like this who are just like, oh my God, what's a blog? How would I go about blogging? Like, how would I do? I could put words up there. I push. Whoa, wow. And the same with Twitter. Like the hardest question that you'll ever try and confront is to explain to somebody what Twitter is, right? I mean, it's not a microblog. It's a lot of things to a lot of people. And so the genius of those platforms is everything that's not there. And so a guy like Peter looks at that and he doesn't see complexity and he doesn't see like massive processes driving it, right? And instead he just sees a blank box and into which any of us can input up to 140 characters. And what he does when he makes that judgment is he discounts the value of the human in that equation. And that's something that Eric did in that statement, and he's since come around to the value of Twitter. But that's something that you'll find it's very easy for engineers to do, is to discount how much the human using your stuff adds the value to your stuff, right? So Twitter isn't about the platform itself. It's about the stuff that people put into it, right? It's about the tweets. And so, and the genius of what Ev did when he was guiding the company was what can we do with this product to peel stuff away, make it less complicated, and make the on-ramp to publishing stuff easier and more beautiful. Where the treasure lies in the stuff they publish, what the true genius is in the simplicity of getting them to publish it. And so that's something that's so easy to underestimate. And you'll hear people all the time be like, Twitter hasn't innovated anything in years, and you're like, but that's the thing. Like, done right, it doesn't occur to you. Like, done right, Google's innovations don't occur to you, right? I mean, search is amazing right now. Amazing. Like, the stuff you want is almost always in the top 3 results. And yet everyone's like, Google's a one-trick pony. You're like, I'll take a $20 billion quarter one-trick pony any day. So
even on a micro level, when people accuse things of being first world problems.
I want to be clear about, like, I absolutely believe that we should be investing more in disruptive education, right? And I write a check to the Khan Academy every year. Like, I love I'm inspired by what Samant Khan is doing. And I love a lot of the stuff that's going on in the kind of outsourced classroom in the cloud stuff. Like, healthcare is wide open. I mean, just even the infrastructure of healthcare, like, it's a disaster, right? And half of what our president did in the Affordable Care Act wouldn't have been necessary if our system wasn't just so fucking back-ass, we're broken. Like, who's paying who, how, when, and how information doesn't flow there. I would love for that to be broken open by entrepreneurs, like, who are native from that space, who understand what's broken about that space. But dude, there's guys like Elon Musk, right? I mean, like, have you been in a Tesla or seen one? That is a no bullshit sports car, right? Their sedan goes 0 to 60 in 3.7 seconds, right? Like, that's a family automobile, right? Like, I mean, that thing has 300 miles range on a 6-hour charge. Like, so it's not only an amazing electric car and you're doing right by the environment, it's badass, right? That same guy is putting rockets into space. He's using decommissioned NASA facilities now. Like, we can't even get our shit together on a space program. This dude has a private company, is putting rockets into space and docking the International Space Station. Oh, and by the way, he also happened to found Solar City, like, equipping, I think he's like the 2nd largest distributor of solar panels in the country right now. And talk to that guy about solving big problems. But get back to Twitter for a second, man. I mean, Twitter has fomented revolutions. Like, Twitter allows any of us to search disease symptoms. Twitter knows about earthquakes before the U.S. Geological Survey knows about earthquakes. Like, it's one of the most powerful information distribution platforms ever, because it's taken what works about the internet and made it more accessible to more people.
Does it only work for communication tools?
What do you mean?
So your take on this, does it only work for communication tools like Twitter?
In case it didn't go into the mic, does it only work for communication?
Does what only work? Does big? Does it only work for communication tools? I mean, I don't think so. I think if we were to break down, like, what does solving big problems entail? Like, solving big problems entails accessibility to the largest number of people, or impact on the largest number of people. I think that would be one thing that we would probably agree on if we were like, how do we define a big problem, right? And so what are the common threads that bind us as people? Well, money. To one degree or another, we're all exchanging currency of certain forms, right? And so there are innovations that are happening for good and for bad in the money system, right? But money's more fungible than it's ever been. We can look at innovations like, I think Square is solving a very big problem. I think you can look at Square as a card swipe, which is the version 0.1, or you can look at it as I'm walking into a place and you see my face and you're like, put it on my tab, I'm out, like because I've been geo-authenticated and authenticated against my face, which is kind of hard to fake, and I get my coffee and roll, right? That's a pretty big problem they're tackling, and they're tackling it in a really bold way. But what are the other things that bind us? Our cell phones. So, cell phones are something that are pervasive in the developing world. Like, I love when people who've never been in the developing world talk about, like, well, what are poor people going to do? And you're like, what's funny is you have like 7 different ways to connect to the internet, but everybody has a phone, and they may be rudimentary in features, but they actually depend upon it much more than you do. And so they become masterful users of those telephones much more than you do. Like, you take for granted your iPad and your iPhone and your Mac and all that other bullshit, and like whatever, like Samsung tablet you get tricked into buying. But I actually worked on the Android acquisition years ago. I'm proud of those guys. But I don't own any of that stuff. But so you look for these common threads that bind us, right? I do think there's innovation happening in healthcare. Like, I think you don't have to look any farther than the Gates Foundation, and like what Gates is doing on malaria, and what he's doing on water, and what some of these guys are doing to tackle some really, really big problems. Like, a lot of that stuff is happening in Silicon Valley, is happening in technology, and those challenges are being confronted. So I've debated this with Peter. We don't see eye to eye on it at all. I think sometimes what you're going to find is that something that you and I take for granted, like Twitter, where we tweet about the game score, or like what was more interesting, Obama or the VMAs, or that kind of stuff. Like, other people are using it to communicate pricing in markets, to seek out information, get help, to understand disease symptoms, to participate in civics, to have impact on so many other aspects of their lives that, what if it only did work for communication systems? I'd still take that. I think it's revolutionary.
Unamas?
Hi, my question is actually kind of a segue based on that topic. When you're starting a business and you're building a product, a lot of times you have to maybe fund yourself, bootstrap. So you have to build stuff that your first customers want, which will take you away from building a product that's more general. So maybe the first customer wants 280 characters, not 140. How do you deal with that in growing the business so that you can build a bigger product rather than just servicing the needs of a few small customers and turning into a service-based industry rather than a product-based industry?
Yeah, consulting does not scale. Like, it just doesn't, right? You doing one-off stuff, you can have a nice, comfortable life doing one-off consulting work, but it doesn't scale. And I just had a conversation with Dick Costolo about this recently, who's now the CEO of Twitter, because as one of the early investors in Twitter and one of the frontline guys there, like, when people are whining and complaining about Twitter, I hear about it first. Like, people just throw my name in their reply, and so I look at my reply stream, there's people who are actually talking to me, and there's people who are just pissed off about something, and so they throw my name in there. And so it's really, really easy for that noise to be a distraction, I'll be like, Dick, people seem really pissed off about this thing, and he'll be like, let me show you the numbers on that, that's 0.2% of the total users are pissed off about that thing, but the rest of them keep using it over and over and over again. And so you realize, like, you can be distracted by squeaky wheels sometimes, like, and building features for individual sets, but before you know it, you've got Microsoft Office, and you end up with something that's just not useful, and it's so bloated. I'm going to see Steve Ballmer in 2 weeks. I hope this doesn't go online. As an aside, I got invited to this thing at Microsoft. I've never gone. Every year, I've been invited to this like council of VCs to meet with Steve Ballmer, and I don't like the way they've sued startups. I don't like the way they push their technology around. But this year, they finally feel like the underdog. And I feel like I should just go, maybe kind of lend them some emotional support, Anyway.
Windows 8 is coming out, it feels like they're going to
Yeah.
be even more under the...
Yeah, but that said, if you're developing for an actual paying customer, I get it. I mean, my strong preference would be to not get paid for that thing if you can. I mean, once you get paid for something, it kind of puts concrete boots on you. You're like, shit. Now there's an expectation of providing them some level of service. There's an expectation that like I'm gonna have an SLA. That I'm gonna respond to their calls. That I'm always gonna do it this way, even if a better way occurs to me. And so like, once somebody starts paying you for stuff, it's hard. It can be hard to really be revolutionary and to change. It can also be hard to lose money again. I used to think it was really cool when companies came to me that were like cash flow positive. I used to think that was awesome. I'm like, oh sweet, so this is a sustainable business. What I found is that my cash flow positive companies have underperformed the companies that were losing money because they got stuck. They got stuck with paying customers and they didn't want to deviate from the model that was paying the bills and putting a little bit extra in the bank. And so it was slowing down their innovation and they weren't willing to take the risks necessary to kind of go balls out and do something cool. And so it's funny, I've got and you can try and guess which ones they are, but I've got a couple healthy businesses that are in no rush to get anywhere. And they're nice and the guys who are working there are doing well. And I'm really proud of their work, but none of us are ever going to make a shitload of money on this thing because it's kind of like going like this, And it's like, maybe that's how you would build a family business, a business that you're going to leave to your kids. But in the world of tech, with much more extreme growth and a much more competitive environment, and trying to compete for users, and really kind of fan the flames and grow this thing quickly. Oftentimes, taking on paying customers can lock you in a period where you should be doing some learning still. I mean, when you finally think you've got it dialed and you take on a couple paying customers and they seem stoked, et cetera, and the model's replicable, I'll admit there's nothing more fun than just hiring a bunch of salespeople where you're like, look, eat what you kill, and you set them loose on the world, and they come back with a ton of money, and you're like, yes, it's amazing. There's nothing like scaling up that funnel and knowing you're in Q1 and knowing you've already got so many orders booked for Q3 that you're going to blow your board away with that kind of stuff. But be careful about locking yourself in too early. It can keep you from executing your big vision. Because people depend upon you, right? If you're building something awesome, somebody starts using it and they build it into their life or they build it into their business and they're depending upon you, and they've paid you for it, you owe them something. If they're just kind of using it and it's free, there's a little more of a balance there where you can be like, hey, look, I appreciate everything you've done and that you're digging it. I'm kind of taking it over here, and I'm not going to shut you off, but I'm also not going to. I'm going to slowly degrade that or whatever, move over here. So, I might have to deprecate that, come over here. I just think there's you have to work hard on that balance, but be careful about tying yourself down too early. It could fuck up all your dreams of crazy growth and success. She agrees. That's my baby CC11, by the way. Yeah.
Chris, thanks very much for coming down to Z80 and enjoy your time in Buffalo.
Thank you guys. Good luck here. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks again, man.
Thanks a lot.
Let me turn this off.